Hey guys, Johnny Pagnini here. Welcome to my channel. On today's video, I'm going to talk about subject to. And what subject to is, it's basically a way a buyer can buy a property from a seller by taking over the existing mortgage. I'm going to talk about some of the pros and the cons, how you can protect yourself when doing a transaction like this. If you're a real estate agent, real estate investor, maybe you want to be in the real estate investing space, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions along the way, throw them in the comments. I'll make sure I get back and answer all of them. Thanks. Okay, so if you're watching this video, you're probably a seller wondering, am I getting ripped off by some buyer trying to scam me out of my house? And I'm going to tell you something, you could be getting ripped off by some buyer. Now, you could also not be getting ripped off by some buyer, okay? So here's kind of how you're going to know the difference. First, there are a lot of shady people out there who do shady transactions. So whenever you're doing any type of deal with anybody, you always want to make sure you know who you're doing business with, okay? And here's a really great way to tell the type of character of the person that you're working with. Go to their Facebook page, go to their Instagram page, go to their TikTok, go to their YouTube. Check to see if their profiles are private, check to see if they're public, see the type of people they're hanging out with, see what they do on the weekends. Just try to get an idea of their character. And you can do that pretty quick on social media. If you go to their pages and they're all private, it's really, really likely that you're not going to be able to get a good idea of their character, and that would, for me, be probably something that I would stray away from. Because if people's profiles are private and they're posting things and you can see what their lives are like, they can't hide from anybody. If they're doing transactions and they're doing deals, they have credibility, and you're going to be able to tell that right away by just what they're posting. Because if there were people that they were ripping off day in and day out, they would have a lot of complaints, or their profiles would be private because they'd be blocking those people from having access to them. So this is a really great way that you can evaluate the credibility of somebody. Now, I'm not going to hide the fact that I actually buy property subject to. So if you currently have an offer on the table, or you're thinking about selling your property with this type of transaction, I'd love to connect with you offline, get you an offer, or evaluate the offer that you already have. The way you would do that is by clicking the first link in this description. All of the forms that get sent in, they come directly to me. I will then send you a text, and you and I can chat offline, and I can let you know whether or not you're getting a good deal or you're not, and if I can beat it. And if I can't beat the deal, if I can't beat the current offer that you have, I'm just going to tell you, because I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste my time either. So let's talk a little bit about how a subject to transaction actually works. So whenever you buy a property, there is a mortgage and there is the title. These are two different things. The title is who owns the property. The mortgage is the loan on the property and who's responsible for that. So when a person buys a property subject to, they will acquire the property and take title. They will be the new owner of the property. They will own it. However, the seller is always going to be responsible for the mortgage. Always. It's always going to be the responsible as long as they are on that mortgage statement. As long as the mortgage is in their name, they are responsible for it. Now, this could be a really good thing for somebody who is in a foreclosure situation. This is one of the scenarios where subject to is a really, really great solution to a problem. If the mortgage stays in the seller's name and there are back payments due, the person who acquires the property is going to make all those back payments. They're going to bring the loan current. And then what they're going to do is they're going to make the payments that are still in the seller's name. Remember, the seller stays on the mortgage. So the buyer is going to be making the payments. What is that going to do? Two things. First, when they bring the loan current, it's going to bring them out of foreclosure. They're not going to foreclose on the property, which for a seller is a big deal, because if you foreclose on a property, it's very difficult to get a loan after that. So there are rules around FHA and conventional loans. There are seasoning periods after foreclosure, and it's really unlikely that you're going to be able to get a loan within the next 2 to 4 years. So that's the very first thing that benefits the seller in this type of scenario. But the other thing is because the buyer is making those payments on that same mortgage, what it's going to do for the seller who's probably had their credit destroyed by all the missed and back payments, is going to bring their credit score up. So the longer the buyer is making the payments on the mortgage that's in the seller's name, the better the credit score is going to get for the seller, assuming they don't have any other situations there. So this is a really great scenario for somebody who is in a foreclosure situation. This is a really great solution for somebody in that situation. Now, the other type of scenario that a subject to transaction is really great for is somebody who maybe has negative equity or is maybe at like a break-even point. And I'll give you an example. Let's say your property is worth $500,000 and you owe $500,000 in the mortgage. Well, it becomes very difficult for you to sell that property on the MLS because if you have to bring in a real estate agent to list it for you, you're going to have some fees. And those fees across the nation, the average is 8%. So you have 3% that the seller is going to have to pay to the seller side agent, and then 3% on the buyer side agent. So that's 6%. In addition to that, you're going to have some closing costs that averages 2%. So that's 8% of the transaction that's going to go towards closing costs and to sell the property. So if the property is worth $500,000 and you can only sell it for $500,000, if you do that with an agent, you're going to be responsible for writing that check at closing. You got to pay everybody's commissions and the closing costs at the closing table. And so for these people, a subject to transaction is really great because a subject to buyer can come in and say, look, I'm going to acquire the property for more than it's worth, and I'm going to pay the agent fees and the closing costs and all those things, but I'm going to take over your mortgage. And in that scenario, the seller usually doesn't walk away with any money, but they're at least able to get out of the property. These are a lot of times people who are like in divorce situations, or maybe they need to move because they've been relocated for work, or they got to move for one reason or another, but they can't get away from the property, or they can't rent the property for the actual mortgage payment. They can't rent it to cover the expense of the mortgage. And so this is, again, a very good candidate for a subject to transaction. Now, how would somebody protect themselves as a seller with this type of transaction? So if you are scenario A, where you're in pre-foreclosure and you've got arrears and all these things, should the buyer default, this is like the best thing that could ever happen to you. And maybe not the best thing that could ever happen to you, but let me explain why this would kind of be a good thing. Let's say you sell the property and to a buyer, and the buyer brings up all the payments, all the arrears, brings the loan current, starts making payments, probably fixes up the property, puts some money into it, starts making payments, fixes your credit, brings the loan balance down. If they should default on that loan, if they should miss a payment, the property is going to go back to you via deed in lieu. Okay, so deed in lieu of foreclosure. For whatever reason, that's hard for me to say. I don't know why. The property is going to go back to you as a deed in lieu of foreclosure, which means you take the property back, and now you're probably sitting on a property that's been fixed up. The loan is current, and you could then sell it with probably some equity in the property. Okay, so this would be like a scenario that could happen. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to happen that way, but that is a scenario that could play out. The way that is coordinated, or the paperwork that is put in place when you sign the final paperwork, what you are going to request from the buyer is the buyer is going to put 1 month's mortgage payment in an escrow account. Okay, so at the beginning of every month, because the loan is going to be paid through a new servicer, so the buyer is going to set up their own servicer that is going to withdraw money from their bank and make the payment to the current bank, the current mortgage servicer that you already have. That's going to happen at the first of the month, let's say between the 1st and the 5th, whatever that is, okay? By the 15th, and when that happens, you are going to get an email notification that says, I have now, this payment has now been made. So as the seller, it's like, okay, payment has been made. I see the payment is being made every month. If that email doesn't go out by the 15th of the month or the 20th of the month, usually there's a grace period making mortgage payments. It's usually until the 15th. Sometimes it's till the 20th. But if it's not made within that grace period window, you as the seller have the rights and the authority to release that money in the escrow account to make the payment before there's even a late charge. So now you're stoked, okay? Because that payment gets made, you don't even have to come out of pocket. Should the payment not be made by the 1st of next month, that would mean the buyer has a 30-day late. They haven't made a payment in 30 days. And the deed in foreclosure would then be available for you to take the property back. And now you take control of the property and there's been no missed payments. And this is how you do it. You do the paperwork so you as a seller are protected. If your seller B in the scenarios I gave, where you maybe have like a negative equity situation or just a little bit of equity, this could be a little bit more risky of a transaction for you. And the reason for that is because A buyer is going to come in and they're going to acquire the property for not very much money. And should they stop making the payments within 3 to 4 months, they're not going to pay down the equity significantly enough to where you can go and then sell it. But here's what I'd say. The likelihood of that happening, especially with a reputable buyer, is very, very small. The reason is because a real estate investor isn't buying the property just to go through a bunch of hassle and to lose money. They're going to come into a property, they're going to evaluate it, they're going to see how they can make money by putting a renter in there, doing a wrap buyer or whatever it's going to be, and they're not in the business to lose money, okay? And if they have cash out of pocket, they're going to try to protect their cash out of pocket as well. But again, kind of circling back to where I started at the very beginning, this is why it's really important that you work with a buyer who has a reputation and who can perform, right? Because last thing you want to do is sell the property to somebody who is going to put you in this type of scenario. But in regards to the late payment piece, this is how you're protected in the exact same way. Escrow account gets set up, deed in lieu of foreclosure paperwork is pre-filled out, and you're totally protected in that regard. It would definitely be more of a hassle for you in the event that there is a default, because again, now you got to sell the property where there's no equity. So that's that. So to summarize, a subject to transaction can be a really great solution for a lot of people. Some people, it's not going to be a great solution. Now, I did my best to cover all the things that most people ask with these type of transactions, but I probably left some stuff out. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I do my best to answer every single one of them. Actually, I answer every single question that's put in there. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless.